Join me tonight on Twitch and YouTube at 11:30 p.m. Eastern at the conclusion of the Giants-Eagles game, where I'll talk about everything that happened today in the NFL. Plus, I'll have my thoughts on the Jaguars and their playoff game against the Chiefs. Link to join below. And now, on with our feature presentation. A few weeks ago, I did a video about a bizarre game that took place during the 1968 NFL season, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner. On December 15th, 1968, the Chicago Bears played the Green Bay Packers. And for the Bears, this game was incredibly important, because if they won this game, then they would be going to the playoffs as the winners of the Central Division. However, if they lost this one, then the Minnesota Vikings would win the division, and the Bears would be watching the playoffs from home. In what had to be, considering the circumstances, one of the biggest games in the long and storied history of the Packers-Bears rivalry, the Packers prevailed by one measly point, taking it 28-27. However, more than half a century later, that game is best remembered for how it ended, mainly the fact that the game ended before the clock hit triple zeros. Because with just over 11 seconds left, the referee decided to call the game early for some reason, even though the Packers still had to run one more play, and the Bears, theoretically, could have gotten the ball back. Whether that play would have made any difference or not, who knows? However, you can't possibly decide the division title before the clock runs out. There's a reason that the game takes 60 minutes to complete, as referees cannot just arbitrarily decide when a game ends. But apparently, that wasn't the case in 1968. Because I kid you not, quite literally, the very next week, it happened again. Only this time, it wasn't for a regular season game. This time, it was in front of the entire country in the playoffs on national TV for everyone to see. Because in this game right here, the 1968 divisional round of the playoffs between the Cleveland Browns and the Dallas Cowboys, the referee decided to call the game with roughly 1 minute left on the clock. The final minute of the game? Yeah, it just didn't happen. It's as though it just didn't exist, and more than half a century later, the final minute of this game that never happened deserves to be remembered for just how insane this whole situation was. Because this is the story behind one of the craziest and most absurd controversies in the history of the divisional round. Before I talk about the controversy in question at the very end of the game, we need some context to understand how the game was going, as well as the participants involved that made this game so memorable all these years later. It's December 21st, 1968, and we have a battle on our hands at Cleveland Municipal Stadium between the Cleveland Browns and the Dallas Cowboys in the divisional round of the playoffs. For this game, the stakes are simple. Win, and not only do you make it to the NFL Championship, getting one step closer to Super Bowl III, but you get to host the game as well, thanks to the really stupid rotational system that the NFL put in place, where game locations were determined by a divisional rotation. It's why the Cleveland Browns, despite being 10-4 and losing the head-to-head, are hosting the Dallas Cowboys, who are 2 wins better at 12-2. Seriously, why the NFL even had this system in the first place is beside the point. However, one thing that couldn't be denied is that entering the playoffs, the Cowboys and the Browns were 2 of the best teams in all of football. In one corner, you had a Dallas team that was in the postseason for the 3rd straight season, which was the longest active streak in the NFL at the time. The Cowboys had won 5 straight games, and had done so in rather convincing fashion, winning all of those games by at least 2 possessions, winning 4 of those 5 by 3 possessions, and outscoring their opponents 163-64 in that stretch, or an average of roughly 20 points per game. Dallas finished the season by scoring a whopping 431 points over the 14 games, for an average of 30.8 points per game, which was the top total in the league. And thanks to a dominant passing game courtesy of Pro Bowl quarterback Don Meredith, as well as All-Pro wideout Bob Hayes, and 1,000-yard receiver Lance Rensel, no one could stop Dallas when they had the ball. And that's not even mentioning how good their defense was, allowing just 13.3 points per game, which was the 2nd best total in the league, only behind the Baltimore Colts. They had roughly half of their defensive starters make the Pro Bowl, with 5 guys, including future Hall of Famers Bob Lilly, Mel Renfro, and probably Chuck Howley after the 2023 induction, receiving that honor. And the thing with the Cowboys was that even though they seemed unstoppable, against the Browns, if that was even possible, they were even more unstoppable. On Thanksgiving in 1966, which was the first time ever that the Cowboys played on Thanksgiving, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, the Cowboys beat the Browns 26-14. Ever since that game, it was as though Dallas, no matter the year, no matter the time, and no matter the place, had Cleveland's number. The Cowboys beat the Browns to open up the 1967 season, and then destroyed them in the divisional round of the playoffs by a final score of 52-14. And then this season, when the two teams met in the regular season, the Cowboys won in another rout, taking it 28-7. Dallas was 4-0 in their last 4 meetings against Cleveland, outscoring them 127-49 in that stretch, for an average of 19.5 points per game. And in none of those meetings did Cleveland score more than 14 points. Some teams just have an opponent that no matter how good they are, or no matter how bad the other team is, they just can't beat them and get over the hump. And that's what the Cowboys were to the Browns. But that's not to say that the Browns weren't going to go down without a fight. Not at all. Because the Browns were still an awfully good football team, and had won 8 of their last 9 games heading into the playoffs, with one of those wins being Baltimore's only loss of the regular season. After 3 games, head coach Blandon Collier made a quarterback switch, replacing Frank Ryan with Bill Nelson. Oddly enough, Collier made the switch, I kid you not, because he got a really bad night of sleep, and that was the only way he knew how to go back to bed. You can learn more about that by clicking the card in the upper right corner. But ever since that switch, the Browns were a completely different team. Whereas they averaged just 12.3 points per game before the switch, they averaged 32.4 points per game after the switch, and finished the year with the 3rd best offense in football. Thanks to Nelson's great play, the great running of future Hall of Famer Leroy Kelly, who ended the year as the league leader in rushing yards for the 2nd straight year, and rushing touchdowns for the 3rd straight year, and a solid defense that led the league in turnovers forced and interceptions, picking off a league-leading 32 passes, the Browns had a great turnaround and wound up winning the Century Division. With that, the stage was set. The Browns against the Cowboys in a battle to go to the NFL Championship. For the Browns, this was their moment to get revenge on the team that had destroyed them time after time the past few seasons, including last year's playoffs. This was the one team that seemingly stood in Cleveland's way on a yearly basis, and that the Browns just couldn't figure out, for whatever reason. But not on this day, not at all. Because in front of an incredibly excited and chaotic crowd of over 81,497 fans, at long last, the Browns prevailed. Little brother just defeated big brother, and the Browns, despite being underdogs, won the game by a final score of 31-20. It didn't start all pretty by any means, as the Cowboys led it 10-3 midway through the 2nd quarter. However, the Browns scored 28 of the ensuing 31 points, and late in the 4th, led it 31-13, with the game seemingly out of reach. It was an insanely good defensive performance, which received praise from head coach Blandon Collier, who said, straight up after the game, that he couldn't think of a greater defensive effort by any Browns team. Cleveland held the Cowboys to just 86 yards rushing on 2.8 yards per carry. Don Perkins, the 6-time Pro Bowl running back who had over 1,000 yards from scrimmage on the season, he did absolutely nothing. Don Meredith, coming off of one of the best seasons of his career, he was so bad that he got pulled midway through the game for Craig Morton. Meredith went 3 for 9, completing just 33% of his passes while throwing no touchdowns and 3 interceptions, and while posting a passer rating of 9.7, which is worse than if he did nothing but spike the ball into the ground on every single play. It's funny when you break it down. Meredith threw 3 passes to his team, 3 passes to no one, and 3 passes to the other team. Perfectly balanced. In total, the Cowboys turned it over 4 times, and combined with the best offensive outing that the Browns had against the Cowboys in years, thanks to a 2-touchdown, 133 scrimmage yard performance from Leroy Kelly, the Browns were victorious and were heading on to the NFL Championship to play the winner of tomorrow's Minnesota Vikings-Baltimore Colts game for a shot at the Super Bowl. However, with 40 seconds left in the game, after Craig Morton threw a touchdown pass to Walt Garrison to make it 31-20, even though the game was pretty much over, it wasn't over. Yes, a lot had to happen for the Cowboys with 40 seconds left to win the game at that point, and their odds had to be super minuscule. But we've seen crazy things before. Heck, in a year where the comeback in the Heidi game happened, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, nothing's really out of the realm of possibility. Recover the onside kick, score a touchdown, recover another onside kick, and then score another touchdown, with this one being on a bomb to the end zone. Again, by no means am I saying that they were going to win this game, or had a good shot, but while it was relatively hard, it wasn't so absurd to the point where I'm just being silly. There was still at least somewhat of a chance, even if it was 0.1%. But for Browns fans, they didn't see it that way. The overflow crowd of well over 81,000 fans had their minds set on storming the field and acting in a celebratory manner. They had made their way onto the field with 58 seconds left, watching the final minute of action bunched together near the sidelines, almost like a scene from a college football or basketball game where they're preparing a court storming, and none of the fans are touching the field from an inbounds perspective, as they're all technically out of bounds. But they're so close that if they took one step, they would be in the field of play or on the court. When that clock hit triple zeros, everyone knew what was coming. Those Browns fans, many of whom were cold and drunk by this point, were going to storm the field, and there was nothing that security could do to stop it. Heck, they were already on the field, just not on the playing surface. You were kind of screwed and powerless by that point. Except that these fans did not wait until the final gun went off. Because after Mike Clark hit the extra point for the Cowboys to make it 31-20, the fans made a run for it. And just like that, thousands upon thousands of fans stormed the field, mobbing the Browns players, celebrating, running around, and chanting "Bring on Baltimore," even though the Colts didn't play until tomorrow. Now you had all these fans on the field, and 40 seconds still on the clock. This is the actual footage of the Browns fans storming the field early, well before the game was over. So what did the referee decide to do about this? In a completely normal situation, there would be an order to get the fans off the field, and to play out the rest of the game, especially since this is a playoff game, and the Cowboys technically still have possession, so they still have a shot to win it, as slim as it might have been. But not here. For whatever reason, not here. Because the referee, quite literally, fired off the final gun and ended the game with 40 seconds left. There would be no onside kick attempt. There would be no last-ditch effort by the Cowboys. The game was over. Browns win. But here's what might be even crazier than that. You would think that the Cowboys would be irate over this. You would think that head coach Tom Landry would be losing his mind, and the players would be losing his mind, with Landry saying, rightfully so, "How can you possibly call the game early? How can you end our season before the clock hits triple zeros? How are we being punished for the actions of Cleveland's fans? Just get them off the field and let us finish the game." You would think that Landry would be protesting this decision like there was no tomorrow. However, for Landry, he did nothing about it. He didn't protest. He didn't get in the referee's face. He was just like, well, that's the game. Just wasn't our day. Seriously, not that protests are ever that effective when a head coach tries to change a referee's mind, but this might be the one time that it would have actually worked, and the league office would have gotten involved and said to the referee, "You have to finish the game. It's the rules." But nope. Landry and his team just walked off the field and let the Browns have their moment, however premature it may have been. A playoff game ending early because fans just decided that the game should be over, and because security was completely incompetent and helpless. It's crazy how this wouldn't even be the last time that Browns fans, at least for a brief moment, caused the game to end early, as we had Battlegate in 2001, which you can learn more about by clicking the card in the upper right corner, although they did wind up finishing that game. But everything about this situation seems insane, and rightfully so. Imagine if the Chiefs are beating the Jaguars, and Chiefs fans decide to storm the field. And the referee says, "Sorry, Jags, nothing we can do. Chiefs win." Imagine if the Eagles are beating the Giants, and Eagles fans decide to storm the field, and the referee says, "Game over. Eagles win it." You can't possibly imagine that. The NFL today would never allow that to happen for a variety of reasons. But not in 1968, because in 1968, at least when it came to this Browns-Cowboys game, even though it shouldn't have been over until the fat lady sings, and even though there were 40 seconds left in a two-possession game, it seems like there were thousands upon thousands of fat ladies singing on the field on this day. Get your official Jaguar Gator 9 merchandise by going to jg9shop.com, and be sure to like this video, ring the notification bell, and subscribe down below if you haven't already, as it helps the channel out a lot. And be sure to check out Twitch every Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern for your chance to play NFL trivia and win cash prizes. Link in the description below. If you want to see videos like this condensed down to 60 seconds, then follow me on TikTok at JaguarGator9. To see college football videos, subscribe to JaguarGator8. To see highlight videos of players throughout the history of the NFL, subscribe to JG9 Highlights. Also, special thanks to all of our Patreon supporters for helping out the channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. See how you can become a patron and request future video topics in the description below.